Imagine a 2.5 millennial old tradition of monarchy just evaporating, literally collapsing almost overnight. Back in 1979, the whole world watched in absolute shock as the imperial state of Iran fell apart, sending massive shockwaves through global geopolitics. So today in this explainer, we're unpacking the rapid and, honestly, highly paradoxical rise and fall of the Pahlavi dynasty. We're talking immense economic booms, intense Cold War drama, and a revolution that permanently rewired the Middle East. Let's get right into it. Just to give you a quick roadmap of where we're headed. First, we'll look at forging a new dynasty. Then, global conflict and coups. Number 3 is the White Revolution, followed by repression and revolution. And finally, we'll wrap up with the Pahlavi legacy. All right, part 1. Forging a new dynasty, from Cossack to king. To really grasp who the Pahlavis were, we have to look at the massive power vacuum they stepped into. Back in the early 20th century, the Qajar dynasty was technically running Iran, but the state was incredibly weak. They were practically drowning in debt, dealing with horrific famines during World War I, and frankly getting completely pushed around by British and Russian interference. It was basically a textbook recipe for a strongman to step in and seize the reins. And that transition happened with mind-boggling speed. In 1921, a military commander by the name of Reza Khan leads about 3,000 Cossack troops straight into Tehran. It was a coup, but it was largely unopposed. Fast forward 2 years to 1923, and he's the prime minister. Then, by December 1925, the government officially deposes the old dynasty and crowns him as the brand new Shah. Now, here's a really fascinating detail. He deliberately chose the dynastic surname Pahlavi. That wasn't just a random name. It was a direct callback to the ancient, mighty Sasanian Empire. He was projecting strength and laying down deep historical roots right from day one. So Reza Shah sees his new, highly centralized state as a modern player on the world stage, and he aggressively pushes for modernization. In 1935, he makes a move that is highly symbolic but absolutely massive. He formally requests that all foreign diplomats stop using the Western accent in Persia and instead use the native term Iran. It was this incredibly bold assertion of national identity. He was telling the world, hey, this is a new, modern era for us. Moving to part 2, global conflict and coups, from World War II to the Cold War. Because, of course, this young dynasty didn't exist in a bubble. Global conflicts were about to seriously test the foundations of the new Pahlavi state. When World War II kicked off, Reza Shah actually declared Iran neutral. But, geopolitics had entirely different plans. In 1941, both British and Soviet forces launched a sudden surprise invasion of Iran. And it was strictly strategic. The British desperately needed to secure the massive Abadan oil refinery and block any German influence, while the Soviets needed a safe supply line, what became known as the Persian Corridor. Iran's military had to surrender in a matter of days. The immediate fallout? The Allies forced Reza Shah to abdicate and just placed his 21-year-old son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, right on the throne. This threw the young Shah straight into a chaotic, highly tumultuous post-war era. His early reign was just a high-stakes scramble for survival and control. In 1946, with Western backing, Iran managed to dismantle Soviet-backed separatist states up north. Then, in 1949, an assassination attempt on the Shah ironically gives him the momentum to declare martial law and consolidate even more constitutional power. But the true flashpoint hits in 1951, when Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalizes Iran's British-owned oil industry. As you can imagine, this triggers an absolutely massive international crisis. The tension finally boils over in a 1953 coup backed by British and American intelligence that overthrows Mossadegh and firmly cements the Shah's imperial control. Which brings us to part 3, the White Revolution, oil wealth and Westernization. Coming out of the chaos of 1953, Iran enters a wildly different phase. The Shah is now fully in charge. He's a crucial Cold War ally to the United States, and he leverages that backing to just radically transform the nation. Almost $78 billion. That was Iran's estimated nominal GDP by 1978.
Just let that number sink in for a second. It is a staggering figure representing unprecedented, explosive economic growth. And it was heavily anchored by booming global oil revenues. Iran was becoming incredibly wealthy, and it was happening incredibly fast.
And the Shah took all that incredible wealth and launched this massive top-down reform program known as the White Revolution. Now, this wasn't just about military buildup. It was a total systemic overhaul. We're talking dramatically expanded education programs, totally revamped healthcare infrastructure, rapid-fire industrialization, and a genuine, noticeable jump in the overall standard of living for a lot of Iranians. They were literally building the infrastructure of a highly modern nation right before everyone's eyes. Naturally, the Shah wanted the entire globe to see this progress. So in 1971, really hitting the absolute peak of his imperial confidence, he throws this unbelievably lavish celebration. It was to commemorate 2,500 years of the Persian Empire, directly linking his own rule all the way back to Cyrus the Great. It was an off-the-charts projection of extreme wealth, stability, and historical glory to a completely captivated international audience.
So the economic growth, undeniable. The international prestige, through the roof. But a highly centralized, rapid-fire modernization project like that almost always casts a shadow. We really have to stop and ask, in this relentless race toward Westernization and unimaginable wealth, who exactly was being left behind? Part 4, Repression and Revolution. The paradox implodes. Because, as it turns out, the state's aggressive push for modernity and its iron-fisted control inadvertently planted the seeds of its own explosive downfall.
You see, while the economy was booming, political freedom was not. To maintain his absolute one-man rule, the Shah relied heavily on Savak, Iran's state security and intelligence secret police. They were used constantly to crush political dissent, employing brutally severe methods, including torture and executions. For a lot of Iranians, just the presence of Savak created this heavy, suffocating atmosphere of severe repression and fear, which obviously fueled some very deep, simmering anger against the crown. On top of that, all this immense oil wealth sloshing around led to staggering wealth inequality and some really deep-seated corruption among high-ranking officials. Actually, an anti-corruption study group led by Manusher Ganji submitted over 30 detailed reports about the graft happening right inside the royal circle. And the Shah's response? He completely brushed them off. He called the reports false rumors and fabrications. Refusing to address that internal decay only alienated the Iranian public even further.
All this created an incredibly intense paradox. On one side, you have the monarchy, pushing hard for secular rule, rapid westernization, and strict top-down imperial control. But on the other side, you've got this vast, rapidly growing opposition. And this wasn't just one single group. We're talking a very broad, complex alliance of communists, socialists, and highly influential Islamic clergy, led by the exiled Ruhollah Khomeini. Despite their differences, they were completely united by a fierce anti-Western sentiment, demands for actual political freedom, and a deep desire to return to Islamic traditions that they felt the Shah was actively trying to erase.
By the late 70s, that tension finally just snapped. The cascade of events was shockingly fast. In 1978, you've got massive nationwide protests and strikes that completely paralyzed the country. The military just couldn't contain it anymore. By January of 1979, the Shah and his family are forced to flee the country into exile. Fast forward to February, the imperial state officially collapses entirely, and by April, a totally new, undemocratic regime, the Islamic Republic, is formally established in its place. Just like that, over half a century of Pahlavi rule was completely dissolved in a matter of months.
Which leads us to our final section, the Pahlavi legacy, ghosts of an empire. What exactly happens to a dynasty once the empire is actually gone? It's fascinating to reflect on the complex aftermath and the genuinely surprising resonance this era still holds for people today. For the Shah himself, the end was pretty quiet and honestly tragic. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi died of cancer in Egypt in July 1980, hosted by Anwar Sadat. But the family's political story didn't end there. His son, Reza Pahlavi, remains in exile today and actually continues to be a very prominent opposition figure, actively advocating from abroad for a transition to liberal democracy in Iran. But what I find truly remarkable is how the memory of the Pahlavi era has shifted inside Iran itself over the years. Even with the autocratic, repressive nature of the Shah's rule that led to his fall, the historical memory of that era's rapid economic growth and secularism has somehow survived. Incredibly, during recent demonstrations against the Islamic Republic, including the massive 2025 and 2026 protests, chants of Javed Shah, which means long live the Shah, have actually resurfaced among protesters on the streets. It leaves us with a really profound paradox to think about. The Pahlavi state was a regime that fell apart because its aggressive top-down progress completely alienated its own people. Yet, decades later, that very same progress is being invoked by a totally new generation fighting for change. So, how does a deposed, highly controversial dynasty from 1979 manage to remain such a powerful, complex symbol in modern geopolitical movements today? It's the kind of question that reminds us that history is never really finished. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.